silent. 1 minute warning. Off.
Right, let's
Hey, I'll look to you for...
That'll scare people. It might change your minds.
Public can hear us now.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen and councillors, I'll call the meeting to order and declare it open at 6:30. Item 1.1 is apologies for absence. None of those?
Mr Mayor, we've got Councillor Duffy for lateness this evening.
We have to move that, or
I don't think so.
For lateness.
Just FYI.
Put him down as absent.
no councillor appearance by Zoom. I'll move on to 1.2, live streaming and recording. This council meeting is being live streamed and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to be live streamed and recorded. Please ensure that if you speak at this council meeting that you ensure you are respectful to others and use appropriate language at all times. Orange City Council accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gesture made during the course of this council meeting. A recording will be made for administration purposes. Administrative purposes. 1.3, acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders both past and present of the Wiradjuri nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginal Australians who are present. Item 1.4, which is declarations of interest. Does any councillor wish to declare any conflicts of interest in any matter for consideration at tonight's council meeting? Councillor Miletto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have two items, the first being item 4.1, notice of motion, New South Wales Rugby League high profile games in Orange. I would consider this to be a less than significant non-procuring interest as I am President of the Orange District Football Association and will be staying in the room and voting on the motion. With regards to item 5.4, payment of councillor superannuation. With regards to this item, Mr Mayor, I believe for me to vote on this item would be a significant pure interest and do not concur with the information previously provided. It indicates that it is not a conflict of interest. Councillors be asked to vote on an item that is a direct financial benefit to themselves. It says that paying superannuation to council is optional and not compulsory. My understanding that superannuation is a legislative provision. However, in my opinion, this is not clearly outlined in the documentation that I've been provided. A conflict of interest does not have to be real. It only has to be perceived to be a conflict of interest. I'll therefore not be remaining in the room and I will not be voting on this item.
Thanks, Councillor Miletto. Councillor Kinghorn.
Yeah, I've just got my usual. So item 6.2, I won't be able to vote on that. That's a significant pecuniary interest as my husband's company does work for one of the applicants. And I just also need to mention that on page 574, which is attachment 2, completed actions, there's an item in there that mentions my address and therefore me. So that's not a pecuniary interest at this stage, but I just thought I'd mention it. So.
Thanks, Councillor Kinghorn. Any other? Councillor Greenhalgh.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to declare a pecuniary interest in item 5.7 on the agenda, fees and charges for Carl Sharp Cricket Centre, as I am a junior delegate of the Orange City Cricket Club and my son is also a member. I would also like to declare an interest, I would think it be non-significant, in item 4.1 for the proposed rugby league games, the new stadium, as I am Secretary of Bloomfield Junior Rugby League. However, I believe there would be no financial benefit to our club should that go ahead.
Any other declarations? Thanks, councillors. That will be noted. We'll adjourn the meeting for the conduct of the open forum. We have one speaker and that's Mr Nicholas Drage. I'm speaking to item 5.3. Resolutions of Council in relation to item 5.9C of Council meeting 15th of March 2022. Request for financial assistance event sponsorship round 3. Sponsorship to the Yugi Owl. Did I say that right? Yu-Gi-Oh! WCQ Regional Qualifiers. Mr. Grage, could you come to there? I'll just introduce the councillors. We've got Councillor Peterson, Councillor Mallard, Councillor Power, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Greenhalgh, Councillor Witten, Councillor Miletto, Councillor Kinghorn, Councillor Evans, Councillor Floyd and Councillor Duffy will be here soon. Mr. Drage, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and thank you, councillors. I wanted to speak to this item this evening. Unfortunately, due to a process issue, I was unable to speak or I was denied the opportunity to speak to the item when it was first discussed. To give you a bit of a background on this event is one that attracts people from all over the state to locations in New South Wales to hold these events, for people to qualify to further events down the track. This particular event is one that we had 75% of the applications for that were people from outside of Orange. Now, we applied for this grant in November, so on the 16th of November, which was when we were first given the event. Throughout multiple follow-ups through the 6th of December, 20th December, 12th of January and the 14th of January, I asked council staff if there was any more information required from them for the grant application to go ahead, understanding that council was in caretaker mode when the application was put forward and the new council was elected and not up and running at that point in time when the event was happening on the 15th of January. I had a concern that the application would be denied based on the fact that it could not be approved because it was going to be happening in that period of time. On the 18th of January, I received an email from council staff members saying that it would be recommended for approval post that because all the information provided was correct. On the 8th of March, I followed up again. And then on the 14th of March was the day that I saw the council papers that it would be recommendation was to deny the application based on lack of information. On the evening of the council meeting on the 15th of March, council staff were asked by Councillor Miletto if applicants were asked to provide additional information to help their application to be approved if there was not sufficient enough information in the original application. This clearly did not happen, although on that evening council staff said that the applicants were contacted. On that day as well, I spoke to other council staff members asking if I could come and speak at the council meeting. As I was told, my only option was to get the councillors to vote against the recommendation. I was denied that opportunity by council staff, who said they would sort the problem out, but then did not get back until 6 p.m. that evening. They were spoken to at 12:30 that day. I have a concern that this may not be an isolated incident amongst applicants. I don't know if I'm the only one in that round of applications who was not contacted, but there were other applications that were also denied and who were told that they'd been spoken to. I'm coming and speaking to you this evening that this particular matter be not finalised this evening, however, that a motion be raised to have the application reassessed with a new report to give me a fair go, as I don't feel like that was actually given. I'm a business owner and a resident here in Orange. I run these events not to make a profit. I run them to ideally break even. However, with the timing of this event being in a wave of the Omicron variant of COVID, we did make a significant loss. The amount of money that I requested from council, it is a very exact amount of money. That was exactly what, if we would have sold all of our tickets in a perfect world, would have covered our costs to the $0. Ask that be given the opportunity to have this grant application reassessed, that if council staff do require more information to ask me for that information, which I'd happily provide. If after that and all the information has been provided, it is still declined, that's fine, I was given a go. I would also like to bring this up for any future applicants, that we bring awareness that this process should be followed properly. Applicants should be contacted, that they should be asked to provide more information, because there'll be many like myself who this will be the first time that they are going through this process and may request guidance. I understand that this is a type of event that probably no councillors here would be interested in participating in. However, there are hundreds and thousands of people across the state and the country who participate in these events, and plenty in our own backyard who...
You're 20 seconds, Mr. Drage.
Thank you. Who are participating in these events at a national and international level. So I'll just ask that you take the consideration to allow me to have this application reassessed. Thank you.
Mr. Drage.
Mr. Mayor, in terms of process, I would suggest you go ahead with the meeting and as printed, and rather than have a motion, I think if you could get a majority of councils to ask me to write a report, staff, of course, would be happy.
So when do we ask for that?
Now,
I'm happy to move that, Mr. Mayor.
I'll second that.
You do it as a motion.
So the motion is that the CEO bring us back a report on the issue that Mr. Drage has brought up, and then we'll deal with it further on from then. Is there any speakers for or against the motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Abstained. Mr. Mayor. The application or applicant through the business
So you want to
chambers.
declare an interest? Yeah, that's. Does Jack have to leave the room? Might be a good idea.
If we're going to debate it for some time, I would think yes.
Just 2 seconds, Mr.
In that case, Mr. Mayor, the applicant's personal friend, and I'd like to say as well.
Okay, we've got two declarations of interest from Councillor Peterson and Councillor Evans. Councillor Miletto.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When this issue was raised before, I spoke to it and I was concerned as must have been picked up on live streaming or something. But I did ask a question because there did appear to be several applications which were denied or rejected, and I was just curious to know whether there was any feedback to the applicants as to why before they actually came before council. That may have alleviated a bit of the process, the heartache for some of those applicants. So basically, as the applicant has clearly indicated, all he's asked for is a fair go. I think we've, in hindsight, we've looked at that and we're prepared to do that. But he raises a good point that perhaps part of the process moving forward in the future is that we do make contact with some of these applicants who are going to not meet the criteria and explain why. And if they have any additional information, well, perhaps it can be presented. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Miletto. Any other speakers? No other speakers. I'll put the motion. All in favour, raise your hand. Against? Carried. We get the other councillors back in the room, please. The heavens have opened up outside.
Evans or Evans?
Evans.
Okay, I'll move on to item 2. There's no mayoral minutes. I'll move on to item 3.1, which is minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 5th of April 2022. Can I have a mover, please? Thanks, Councillor Mallard. A seconder? Thanks, Councillor Peterson. Any speakers? Councillor Kinghorn.
I want to point out that, which is page 22 in these papers, but was item 2.2, the Planning and Development Committee. I actually left the room. I didn't vote on that one, and it says that I voted for the motion. So I just want that corrected, please.
Yeah, we'll get that amended. Thanks, Councillor Kinghorn. Any other speakers? Being no other speakers, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. I'll move on to item number 4.1, which is Rugby League high-profile games in Orange. This is a notice of motion from Councillor Floyd. You officially move that, Councillor Floyd?
Yes.
And I'll second that for discussion. Councillor Floyd.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move the following notice of motion to the chamber tonight. and that motion is that Council resolves to, 1, engage with willing NRL clubs with the prospect of initiating a long-term association with the City of Orange. 2, seek to formalise such a relationship for the purposes of maximising the potential of the future of the Orange Sports Precinct in attracting high-profile sporting fixtures, benefiting tourism visitation, spend and local entertainment. 3, include in any such agreement that any NRL club affiliated with the City of Orange provide coaching clinics and sports development opportunities for our local schools and sporting organisations and player meet and greet opportunities. 4, consider in the selection of any prospective NRL club affiliation, the club's relationship to Orange, local fan base and the club's proximity to Orange. And finally, number 5, report to the Chamber the process or the progress of this endeavour, all meetings and aspects of negotiations undertaken and timeframes relating to any proposal or agreement. Mr Mayor, I don't think we need to delve too far into the background of this notice of motion. We can all see the benefits that such a venture has brought to other cities in our area, like Bathurst and Mudgee. My belief is this is one opportunity that cannot be overlooked to make Orange a sporting, cultural and lifestyle destination and, of course, increase our tourism spend. Thank you, Mr Mayor and fellow councillors.
Councillor Miletto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Whilst I agree in principle to the prospect of engaging with Sydney-based National Rugby League clubs, I believe that we would need to be cautious about over-committing to any proposal whilst not knowing what our financial position is or could be, especially not knowing what Council's financial position is in the coming years and our capacity to fulfil such a commitment. I'd like to make an amendment to the motion, if I could, please. That amendment would read, the amendment proposed is that Council establish a community working party for the purpose of identifying and maximising all sporting opportunities for all potential users of the new sporting precinct to enhance and further develop the various sporting organisations for the benefit of Orange.
Need a seconder for that. Second to Councillor Kinghorn. You want to speak to that, or you just spoken to it?
I just spoke to it.
Yep. Anyone want to speak against the amendment or for the amendment?
Ask a question
Sure.
related to it. Are council staff not already doing that?
Thanks. Through you, Mr Chair, yes is the short answer. We've identified about 50 different events of sporting and other activities that could be conducted out at the sports precinct. Those facilities that would be available on completion. They do include all the various rectangular sports, but they also include a raft of junior activities, orienteering, cricket, etc., etc. So there's a long list of potential events that could be held out there, and that was part of the business case for the project.
Councillor Whitten.
Mr Mayor, I rise to speak against the amendment and for the motion. It's my understanding that the major clubs, not only NRL but soccer and AFL, are promoting the fact that they want to move to regional centres. And we've seen that with Penrith in Bathurst, we've seen it with St George in Mudgee, we've seen it with, I think even South Sydney are starting to make moves on Dubbo because they spend a lot of time in Dubbo. But the AFL clubs have actually said that they have funds to help build facilities, build stadiums. And certainly I think we should be exploring those sorts of things, excuse me. And I think this motion, I don't want to expand on it and say that we need to go and talk to the AFL people, but we probably should. But the motion is specifically talking about NRL. I think that's a good start. But I think if we start letting the particular different codes know that we're interested in hosting one of those teams as making this their second home ground or their city, we might be pleasantly surprised. We might not be all happy about it because the team that comes here might not be it might be Canterbury, for example, Mr. Mayor. They see the Rabbitohs, but everyone will have their own. But we might have the Western Sydney Wanderers. You never know. But I think we've got to let them know that we're up for discussions to talk to these clubs, see what they're willing to contribute to the community. And it might well only be social-based community activities where they're talking to school kids and getting them involved and interested in their sport. That's a plus.
Councillor Peterson.
I was to give my support for the motion, thinking that other rugby league clubs, we've got Raiders with a regular relationship with Wagga, Panthers in Bathurst, in Mudgee, Rabbitohs in Dubbo. In terms of the amendment, now that's for us as well, I'm relatively neutral, I suppose, to it. I would have thought that sort of a process would be part of the original motion. But I'm happy to speak in favour of the amendment, thinking that would only facilitate this good.
Councillor Greenhalgh.
I would like to speak for the original motion put forward by Councillor Floyd. I think the key thing here is engage willing NRL clubs with the prospect. So for me, that's about starting conversations. It's about uncovering what existing deals clubs have in place at the moment and the terms of those deals. Following up on what Councillor Peterson said, if you look closely at the draw, the teams that potentially we could look at attracting would be the Dragons, the Roosters, the Sharks, the Dogs, the Tigers and Parramatta. I think going back over the last few years, Orange did have a bit of an affiliation with the Roosters, I believe. So maybe that's another relationship that we can foster and promote. So I have no objections to, engaging in those willing conversations with those clubs, because I think they're conversations that need to be started now. So I'm happy to support the original motion.
Thank you. Councillor.
I'll just sum up if...
Yeah, does that close the amendment then? Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I indicated, my major concern with this notice of motion is with regards to the financial implications which could occur, especially not knowing what council's financial position is in the coming years and our capacity to fulfil such a commitment, knowing that the budget is already in deficit. Having spoken to other councils in nearby LGAs, indicate that attracting such rugby league clubs is very costly for their councils, and they run at a loss. But are subsidised in other ways through So it's another issue which I have with this is that it's aimed at one sport in Pacific, which is rugby league, and there are a lot of other sports which are going to use the sporting precinct, and they're not afforded will not be afforded same money, I would imagine, which would be thrown at this, which I assume is going to be between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. So there's not enough information in here for me to support it. I do support it in principle, but to tie ourselves down to something long term, I can't agree with.
Mr. Maunder just wants to have a chat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of the background in other areas, we're the feeder for the Mariners, based up in Newcastle. We've had an event here before, and we still have a relationship with the Mariners. We've had a couple. We've had Newcastle Knights here host a game under the Mining Council's relationship. We have an ongoing discussion with AFL around developing Wade Park once the rectangular fields become operable out at the sports precinct, because the dimensions of that meet the AFL requirements, and developing the ground. So there's some ongoing discussion. I've been having those discussions with the AFL for about 5 or 6 years. So in designing some of the initial concepts, we spoke to the Waratahs, spoke to the ARU, we spoke to the NRL, spoke to Australian Rugby League as well. We had a chat to a couple of clubs, and then we talked about cricket as well. I suppose what I'm saying is, been having lots of conversations with multiple sports around what we could host and what our relationships might look like for not only the sports precinct, but for Wade Park and our other facilities as they become developed, and what those opportunities are. If we were to go down the NRL line, I know they're pushing, take rugby league to the bush. We all hear it all the time. And anything that we would discuss with any of those clubs would obviously come to council for your consideration and determination. So can certainly follow through on the motion from Councillor Floyd, but it doesn't preclude us having all those other conversations at the same time.
Thanks, Thanks, Mr. Maunder. I'll put the amendment first. All those in favour of the amendment, raise your hand. Against? The motion, I want to speak to the motion first. I suppose, the sporting precinct is called the sporting, but we're talking multiple sports, and we have multiple relationships with clubs in Sydney, wherever. The conversations have been going on for years. That's why we have been able to have a city-country game out here, because we put our hat in the ring. At the moment, with obviously Wade Park, that ain't happening anymore. So clubs know that we are building this facility. They know that this is happening. And I'd take on what Councillor Miletto says. I think we can't just put our hat on NRL. It's got to be all codes, rugby union. It's got to be soccer. It's got to be and the other thing too. It doesn't have to be sport. Like it'll give us the scope to hold concerts, to have markets, and all that sort of thing. But I know this motion's predominantly about, and I'm hoping, and it would, if there was any deal done with a club, that cost would have to come back to council to be voted on. And the other thing, hanging our hat on one-off events, I find that a bit strange too. Like we should be, which we are doing, talking to Sports Marketing Australia, who does most of the negotiations for us to get those junior competitions out here. So we need to be able to balance it up a bit. Like, as I said, those one-off events are fantastic and they're great for the city and they give that promotion. But, the businesses and all that, they love those junior competitions. Now, with this precinct we're building, we will be able to hold national and state championships, which brings a lot of money to the town. So, yes, as long as, I'm just reading it, does it say we are talking to other sports as well in this motion? Yeah, I think we need to, I was asking with the movers' permission whether we could add a number 6 to that and also talk to all other sporting codes that might want to use our facility. Would you be right to add that?
Yeah, if I could just speak on that, Mr. Mayor. When I first did draft this up, I actually had included rugby union, soccer, perhaps AFL, all that sort of stuff in it. I just sort of condensed it down, thinking that I could use this as a springboard to go into the other rectangular sports and that as well. So I've certainly got no problems with that at all. I want this to be inclusive of all. So
you're
sports.
right with that number 6 that I just added?
Fine with me, yeah.
And I think I seconded it, didn't I? So I'm happy with it. Is there any other councillors want to speak to this or against? I'll put the motion with the addition of number 6. Can you just read out the motion for us, please? Oh, as printed plus number 6.
And number 6 would include that that staff
Continue their
conduct similar consultations with other sporting
all sporting groups.
as appropriate to the field. Which is kind of
Isn't it basically what I was asking for?
Yeah. You asked for a committee, didn't you? Okay, I'll put the motion. All in favour, raise your hand. Against? Carried. I'll move on to item 5.1, which is recommendations and resolutions from the policy committees.
Recommendations.
Thanks, Councillor Whitten. A seconder?
I'll second.
Thanks, Councillor McDonald. Any speakers? No speakers. All in favour? Raise your hand. Against? Carried. Item 5.2, Draft Community Strategic Plan, Draft Delivery Program 2022 to 26 and Operational Plan 2022 for 2023.
On exhibition for 20.
Thanks, Councillor Whitten. Seconded by Councillor Mallard.
Duffy entering the room. Chambers,
I just stand.
Motion quick.
7 p.m.
Any speakers for this?
Actually,
Mr. Mayor, just had a couple of
Councillor Peterson, you've got a couple of questions?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe for you, Mr. Mayor, I think it's great it goes on public exhibition. Is there a way we can see how many people read the document, how many people open and download it?
Through Mr. Chair, absolutely. We can get statistics on all that sort of thing, yes.
One other question I had for you, Mr. Mayor. On page 42, I read that there's voluntary rate rebates totaling $480,000. I thought that was really good news for pensioners and the like, and something that could be advertised better, given some of the, I guess, negative stuff that can go around rates. Maybe more of a comment than a question, but if that's something that could be advertised on council social media, that we do bear that in mind. I had a question on for page 259. I saw that the borrowing costs had reduced from 1.4 million to 700K by the 25-26 financial year. I thought that was great, but I thought I might ask, what happened with that? That sounds.
Mr. CFO is here to.
I believe that's because, Councillor Peterson, we have a couple of loans rolling off in the next couple of years, so that reduces our repayments and our interest bill. Obviously, if we choose to take out more loans, it'll go back up, but I think we have a big $8 or $10 million loan rolling off in a couple of years' time, so that's why it drops back in 25-26.
I have one question. On page 260, it talks about the roads and footpaths budget, like it was reducing from 18.8 million to 1.8 million for the year 25-26, and in a different column, 5.6 million down to 2.8 million. Substantial reductions for a one that's, I think, very front of mind of the community. I wanted to ask a bit of information for that.
Through Mr. Chair, the previous council was the council that voted in for quite an ambitious, I think it was $900,000 footpath annual spend. That was actually due to come off next year, but the Mayor has asked for an inclusion of that to come back up to $600,000. Mr. Greenham, do you remember the numbers they were going down to? A significant drop, yeah. So that represents a midpoint between the 300,000 expenditure. So the purpose of exhibition is now to hear, obviously, from not only the public but yourselves. So budget comes back,
For you, Mr. Chair, I had a question about fees. For example, on page 380, it's $50 to put hoarding on a council footpath. I wanted to know, particularly if there's pressure on increasing rates, if the, I guess, council fees is a bit of a user pays way for obtaining council revenue, was being looked at. I can see on page 435, there's a reference to benchmarking fees against other appropriate councils, and I thought it might help us as a new council understand the process, how the sort of benchmark of fees are done.
CFO, care to comment? I mean, generally, Mr. Chair, we go around each department and they do the benchmarking themselves. So a $50 hoarding fee, they would have looked at their Bathurst and Dubbo colleagues and seen, I guess, what is fair. Again, you have the ability to change those. Might have builders and people who spend a lot of money on fees, so the effect will not, I note, be one. A lot of these fees, when you come to the front counter and you're doing here and you're a builder, then these.
I had a question about on page 537, it looked like council was providing residential aged care, 1,500 hours of social support, 5 clients of the fortnightly community restaurant, a shopping service, that sort of stuff. I was in some ways impressed. I didn't realise that was a service council provided. I wanted to know if that was something that was profit making or cost neutral thing for council, or if this was something that council wore a cost from and potentially in competition against other care service providers.
Mr. Maunder would be most qualified to answer that with any degree of accuracy. We would like to take it on.
Definitely, thank you.
Again, we have things that are within, we have groups within services that are cost effective, others that. Take it on notice, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Another question for on notice about the caravan park. On page 546 mentioned about the long stay options available for caravan park, and I know that was something that was an affordability issue that faces Orange and all other regional centres. Be interested to know what the, I guess, capacity for that is and capacity for expansion, thinking that might be a useful thing for parts of the community.
Again, we'll take that on notice, but it can also be a vexed issue in terms of long-term car park residents. We've had issues with people literally life out there and walk into a legal minefield. But you are right in terms of, let's say, the medium an opportunity. We'll take that on notice. I believe the Director of Commercial Services is business analysis on the caravan park.
Thanks, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Greenhalgh.
Mr. Chair, through you, on page 42, I would also like to echo what Councillor Peterson said, which is a positive story, that pensioners receive a statutory reduction of $250 off their general rates and $87.50 off both water and sewer charges. Council also offers a voluntary rebate of either 10% or 5% off rates and charges. That's incredible. I don't think enough people know about that, and I think that is very positive for our council. Also, just a matter arising on page 43, if you look at the fund graph, you can see that the proposed consolidated amounts jumped down from 68.47 to 54 to 25. Obviously, that is dependent on the level of support provided by the state and federal government to the community. I would just like some clarification if we could have possibly a report brought back to council with what grants we're actually applying for at the moment, what we've got underway. I just think for some of these, the communities that seem to be doing very well is through their grant funding. So are we doing enough? That, and I think just to help us new councillors get an understanding of where we're at and where we're going in terms of grant funding, that would be a very useful document.
We can bring that for the next meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Kinghorn.
Okay, just a couple of things. Page 58, sorry, just bring it up. Just curious, it just looks funny where it says if Orange City Council consisted of 100 people, there would be 25 people aged under 18 years. I assume they mean Orange City council area, or is that what? Because it sounds like it's the council, and I just thought that was odd.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Also, page 437 in relation to the loans that we have. So we currently have loans totaling $25.7 million. The average interest rate we're paying is 3.07%, which works out about $780,000 a year in interest. I did ask at one of the briefings about whether we can borrowing money from ourselves, because there are a large part of the funds that we have are restricted to be only able to be used for certain things. And I was told that it's possible but frowned upon. But that's a lot of money, $780,000 a year, and if we were able to finance it ourselves, at least that interest would be going back to Orange and not to a bank. So I just have a question about whether that's something that we could look at doing in the future. And a couple of those loans were still quite high interest rates. One of them's 5.96%. And I just wondered why, with interest rates being as low as they are now, why that hasn't been refinanced. If you could explain that to me, I would be grateful.
Through Mr. Chair, I'll take a crack at it. I would think some of those interest rates relate to long-term fixed loans, perhaps. CFO? The answer to borrowing from ourselves is not so much frowned upon. I would rephrase that to say there are a lot of rules we need to be careful with, and the Minister keeps a fine eye on that.
Yeah, that is correct. But yeah, a lot of our loans obviously have, like your home loan, out clauses. If we want to renegotiate, then obviously they're going to miss out on a lot of interest, so they'll want a lot of penalty. I don't know the exact clauses in that loan, but I can take that on notice and get back to you with that loan particularly.
Okay.
And thank you for pointing out the table that I was looking for earlier for Councillor Peterson with all the current loans, and there's 3 rolling off effectively. Like May 15, there's a couple, and May 16, there's one as well.
Any other questions? Councillor Mallard.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to speak in support of the motion and make a couple of general comments, and then I've got questions on one thing in the budget papers. I'm really pleased that this community strategic plan is going out on exhibition. I'm really reading the community engagement report and the report introducing it. I commend the staff for all the work that's been done and the consultants who conducted the community engagement, because we really got a huge amount of great input, and it really made clear that we've got a community that cares, a community that cares about each other and that cares about the environment. And I'm really happy to see what we're looking at with this plan, and looking forward to the community engaging with it over the next 4 weeks. I did want to ask about one item which is on page 270 in the capital works in the budget papers, which is the Mount Canobolas Mountain Bike Trail Centre line item, which is budgeted for $1.5 million in 2023-24. And I guess my first question, I'm just trying to get clarity. I know that we're community interest in that and community organisations and members wanting to comment on it. Like to understand what is expected that $1.5 million will deliver. What is that project basically?
Wanda, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So, Councillor, when we develop our budgets, we project out what we might spend on certain projects should they come to fruition. Some of them are reliant on obtaining grant funding to go with those. So in this instance, there's grant funding in another part of the budget that would predicate that expenditure. Obviously, it's a forward budget, so it might move around. There's a lot to do before we would get to doing anything up on the mountain. Part of that project, though, did also look at doing some infrastructure support the uses of the mountain that exists currently. Some of those were summit infrastructure. I note that the New South Wales government is currently spending a couple of $1 million up there, and it's closed at the moment doing some of that work. There was also some infrastructure down at the base of the mountain itself to support people who might be hiking or other at a visitor centre, etc. So we've left it in the budget at this stage, but it doesn't commit us to that project. But that's why it's there. but it hasn't committed. The funds that are committed are matched by grant funding stage.
Okay. So is that, what's it budgeting for? Is it like, we've obviously got the scoping report that says what?
If we were to start the project, we're anticipating that we'd spend $1.5 million in the initial year, in the initial works on creating a mountain bike trail. So that's what it's for. It's for the creation of a mountain bike trail network and the associated infrastructure.
Thanks.
It's left in there as a project at the moment, as some of our other projects are as well.
Thanks. And one more follow-up, if I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, which is, so that's 2023, 24. There's nothing budgeted that I can see for the coming year. Is there work planned or any, like, in terms of environmental impact assessments?
If that plan, if the project was to proceed, and we'd and there's lots of work that we would have to do, part of which is discussions with the Aboriginal community, certainly the elders, certainly the Lands Council, certainly the broader community. We have at the moment notification from the New South Wales government as to what further work we would be required to do and to obtain the environmental assessments. It's not $1.5 million worth of work, but there is a significant amount of work. If we got to that point, certainly come council to say, what do you want to do, council? Here's what the work plan would look like for this project to proceed. Here's what it would entail. This is what it would cost. How do you want to do? What do you want to do? So that would certainly come to council before anything was done. Council would no doubt be involved in those discussions with those groups that I've just mentioned. And so that's how a lot of things would have to happen. Entire project would cost about $10 million, and it would be done over multiple years. So if we got to that point, you would see it add into the future budgets. But it also needs to be funded. So whether that council, through grants, whatever, would need to also be reflected in the budget. It's left in the budget at the moment because the project, it doesn't have a go or a no-go on it, so we've left it in there at the minute.
Thanks.
That's what it represents.
Thanks, Mr. Moore.
Thanks, Councillor Mallard. Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just a question really regarding the capital budget as well. Just curiosity, just two questions actually. One, the theatre expansion for, again, it's the next financial chunk. What is that? Is that the Civic Theatre? Is that what are we looking at doing there? $6 million. And how is that going to be?
Again, in the budget, it's reflected with the grant funding. That's recognising that our theatre is nearly 30 years old, and it serves the community of Orange and the region really well. It's starting to get to a point where the biggest shows, the A shows, if you like, be big for the fly tower. The big tower, the fly tower with the sets, we can't handle the sets for those A-class shows. It's getting to that point. Not all of them, but some of them. And there's also some sins of the original design which we would correct in terms of operation. So the wings, for example, are really small.
Yep.
To get from one side of the stage to the other, you have to go under the stage and to pop up on the other side. So there's those sorts of things.
Would it include any sort of acoustic?
Yeah.
Because it's very flat.
Yeah. So those sorts of
But again,
grades
it's
to
a
bring
wish list thing.
Yeah, it's an aspirational.
Okay.
It's knowing grant funding, obviously, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's knowing that it's something that it's on our projects of things to do to enhance the city and casting forward 10 years' time, population growth, etc., etc. Attracting shows, all those sorts of things. It's a project that looking at ways to progress it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. And I just I'll echo everyone's comments. I'm really happy for this to go up to on public exhibition. I do just have a slight concern around sort of possible. We've got two major capital things that we're wanting to get achieved, and to me, I'm just a bit concerned about but including the Mount Canobolas stuff at the moment, given that we can't increase rates the way we want to increase rates and revenue raise that way. But I get that they're all sort of aspirational things, but I'm...
Thank you. Councillor Duffy.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just on just a couple of things, I'm quite happy to let this go to the public to have a viewing and for 28 days. Organisations have a look at it in the community groups. Fantastic when they do, and I'll also be making a submission on a few of the things that I think need to be... I want to raise a couple of issues that have been raised, and one is loans. I think we need to be aware that what's projects that we've got going at the moment, which is the Planetarium Conservatorium, and with the increases of cost that's going there, going to be absolutely massive, and we may have to do something like that with that and the sports precinct. There are two things that are going to bring money to the city, and I think when you're talking about grants, I think it's been quite clear when you have a look at other electorates and things like that, you've got to have access to the Treasury. It's wasting your time. I mean, I've said plenty of time in this chamber, you know, you've got community groups running down there waiting for Paul Toole to burp and pick up millions of dollars every time he walks down the street. But that doesn't happen around here, does it? You know, we virtually get nothing. I mean, I must hand it to the previous mayor and Councillor Turner when they went down and saw the Treasurer with our local member Andrew G and came back with $10 million for the Conservatorium. I thought that was fantastic, but that's what shows you that we have to have some alignment or some attachment to the actual treasure. And I think you really need to be aware of that type of stuff.
A bit of pressure on me. Thanks, Councillor Duffy. Any other speakers? Councillor Greenhalgh.
Can I just ask one more question? And I'm not sure who it goes to, whether it's to Scott or someone else can help. Just looking at the function centre improvements, hasn't been given much love, and there's nothing proposed for the next. However, what's the plans? What's the long-term plan for the function centre?
It sounds like a loaded question.
Still my question.
Mr Mayor, could I just speak to Councillor Duffy's point? Would that be possible? Councillor Duffy talked about project increases. So with the timing of both the con design and that grant application, and also sports stadium, the BBRF grant we've got in, that'll be something at that September mini budget need to have a serious look.
So what we have at the moment with the function centre is a maintenance budget for our capital works, just to maintain the standard of the facility at the moment. Building is over 50 years old, as you'd no doubt be aware. And council have looked at different councils have looked at the function centre and enhancements to that site in the past. We haven't included in this budget any major refurbishment. We've got an indication of what that would cost. And that would essentially bring its current layout and everything up to standard if you were to build it, refresh it. Not in there. But it is something that council can obviously consider again in the mini budget.
What is that figure?
About $3.5 million.
Councillor Whitten, do you want to close the debate?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, just to...
Councillor Evans.
Back to you, Mr Maunder. Is it possible to get maybe a master plan of what that upgrade may look like? Because I've been asked by a few business people in town who can have sort of conferences and stuff there, and they have made me aware of the not quite up to standard, as you know, but is there a way that we can inform the people of what's coming?
Council hasn't resolved to do the work at this point. What we simply did was, it's a bit like what we did with Civic Theatre. We know what the industry standard is, and so we estimated what those costs would be to achieve that outcome. That's how we arrived at the 3.5. It's not included in the budget, but it hasn't been adopted. Council have looked at different options in the past about whether an alternative venue would be provided. Certainly in the planning for the ex-services club expansion, there was a function centre proposed for that building, but that was obviously a long-term plan for them. Now that may or may not happen. It included another level, I think, from memory, as an option for the function centre. So there were some things that council looked at in the past, but there wasn't a decision made other than to maintain the facility, which is what is currently in the budget.
Councillor
But I
Mulder.
do have a list.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a point of clarification with regards to a comment which Councillor McDonald made. At this point in time, I haven't made any decision on what the rate increase should be, so I think it's probably a bit preemptive to suggest want to deliver projects in the future. Haven't worked out what that increase is going to be to deliver those. So I think it was just a general comment you made, but certainly the chamber hasn't made any decision on any rate increase to deliver any projects. So.
Thanks, Councillor Mulder. Councillor Kinghorn.
Yeah, this was just a general comment. I asked the CEO several weeks ago about the perception in our community that orange rates are high, or often they think they're the highest in Australia or the highest in New South Wales or whatever, and he kindly sent me through some information saying that's actually not true. We're 15th out of 131, still in that 88th percentile. And he sent a link to some information, which I have to say has to be the most convoluted spreadsheet that I have ever seen. And it's taken several weeks to try and make some sense of it, and I'm not sure that I've been able to, and in conjunction with the 600 odd pages of budget that we've got tonight, it's quite challenging. But I have shortened it to what I believe to be comparable sorts of councils, and our rates are the highest of the comparable councils, and our expenditure is lower in a lot of areas. And I was just wondering, why aren't we curious about that? What benchmarking is done? Surely because we all want the best value for the people of Orange, why aren't we investigating that? Why? I know it's complex, but I just feel it should be part of our job to be on top of that, and that way if they are higher we can say, oh, it's because we do this or because we do that, because we're fantastic, or oh, whoops, we've missed this, let's change that. What's the process? I don't understand.
Very interesting question. Our approach is then to the community strategic plan. Parks and gardens space against. Occasionally we look, but we know that orange is the colour city. This is just know the community loves it. We know that is something we must do. That tends to, and we know we've got some of the portions in our LGA. So I would say driven by those sort of processes rather than sitting right. $1,000 for parts. How does that compare with Dubbo, Bathurst, Cowra? Right, apples versus oranges. I mean, the general answer to your question is we don't do benchmarking as you suggest, but I do know that it would be a very good idea to do that, provide that information.
Just, I think it's the only way you can be transparent, which we should be.
Yeah, it's a lack of transparency. Way were driven into our budget. To listen to the community councillors, but not then benchmark that. I take the point, it's a very good.
Councillor Whitten to close the debate. Comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, as the mover of the budget paper going on exhibition for 28 days, I'm happy to do so. Framing around when staff talk about council have decided, that's us, right? Not staff in this room. So over the years, council have forecasted programs, different projects, and we have to put budgets in place to and then ratify that. Certainly, a lot of these things that are in the budget that have been that are new and that are coming through, us as councillors, before we can lobby for these things. And certainly I can't speak on another councillor in this minister. And I can't talk about subjects that aren't in the budget or are ratified by this, because I'm speaking out of order and I can't represent everyone's view in this room unless it is a motion. Certainly the Mayor can. The Mayor can do that because he is the Mayor. But certainly when this goes out for and all the submissions come back, the real debate begins then. We debate what's in this budget then. Now going out, we can add and put stuff in and take it out before it goes out to the community. But certainly when it comes back is when we then debate and give our staff and the community direction on what we're going to do with different things. So the rates discussion is a very interesting one. In my 20 or 18 years here, it's always been a very passionate debate about those things. And certainly you will see as yourselves as councillors, sorry for ranting, Mr Mayor, but I think it's worth saying, that once we lock in a forecast, it's not rigid, it's not stuck. Some things will be, but you will see other councillors come into this chamber when they're pressured by the community to do things and they need money for those things. Then we have to shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic, move money around because the staff are bound by the motions that we put on this. So if we say that we now want to add another $500,000 to footpaths, where do they get that from? Where do they get that money from? Or if you come in here into the chamber and say, I've got a really good idea and I want to build something for the community. The only source of income that this chamber has or this city has is rates. Everything else is grant funding. That is our only revenue source. And certainly one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that we don't go silly and projects that break the city and our ratepayers. Certainly, we were to put a hold on rates, then we're in catch-up mode forever. Somewhere in the future, they will have to be caught up, and those ratepayers will pay the penalty. That's why you've got to be very mindful of when you vote on rates, is that you keep the continuity there, even though it might seem a lot, all at the time. But a future council will have to make a decision if we were to stop those increases. Future council will have to make the decision to bring those increases in, and it's going to be in one chunk. Ratepayers. So anyway, that's my philosophy around rates. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, I'll put the draft strategic. Gee, I wish I could speak tonight. Draft community strategic plan and draft delivery program. I'll put it to the vote. All in favour, raise your hand. Against? Unanimous. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just take the opportunity to ask Mr. Cook to stand and tell you that this will be Mr. Cook's last meeting as our CFO. He's heading off to greener pastures a little bit closer to his home. Take this opportunity to thank you, Jason, for all your work, for your friendship, and the way you've really lifted, I think, the CFO role. You're the first CFO that we've had, and congratulations to you. Good luck with all your future work. All the best.
Councillor Duffy.
Yes, thank you. So I'd just like to also air the comments of the General Manager and Chairman of Finance.
Speak into your microphone.
I'd just like to air the same feelings of what the CEO has said about Mr. Cook. I've found him as one of the directors, easy to approach, always really willing to chase something up for you or come up with the answers. And I'll be doing that this week anyway, so he will have to continue that for another few days.
Thanks, Councillor Duffy. I'll move on to item 5.3, which is update on outstanding and completed resolutions of council, including questions taken on notice, matters arising and notices of motion. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Miletto moved. Seconded. Councillor Whitten. Any speakers?
Yes.
Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few two questions and an offer. In terms of page 562, there was an invitation to Paul Toole from the meeting 15th of February, and it's still listed as being sent on 565. The donations from the meeting from the 5th of March are still to be processed on the 11th of April. Longer than I thought it might have taken, so I thought I'd ask about the process, how those things were going.
Mr. Chair, I have to take those on notice. Not sure to be finalised on the donations. Right. But I'll take them on notice and come back to you if that's okay. Which page was the
562.
The council invite Deputy Premier, Minister for Regional New South Wales, Minister for Police Paul Toole to meet with council.
And invitations yet to be. I'll chase that up. Make sure those invites go tomorrow.
Speaking of invites, I can see on the same page, 562, that Dylan Olcott's foundation hasn't got back. I did my own little bit of, Quadriplegic Brotherhood research and have the email of his manager. So if you tell me the person I should pass that on to, again, to you.
Yep, that can be done.
All right.
Thank you. Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you. Page 558 in relation to the defibrillators. I do remember when that was the motion was put forward, and the idea was to try and get it says create community awareness location maps of existing automated external defibrillators. And I was curious when I read that because it says there's a number of apps available. However, most are incomplete. The most complete is managed by St John Ambulance. Council in touch to see what assistance we can provide in updating. That was March last year, and I was just curious about it because there are lots of businesses in Orange that do have them, and we certainly haven't been contacted to see whether we do. And I was just wondering if that's on there as having been resolved. I don't actually think it has, and I'm just wondering what we're going to do about it.
Mr. Chair, I don't think it's been resolved. We will revisit it in the morning. Back to you. That's an outstanding report. Thank you, Councillor.
No other speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. I'll move on to item 5.4, which I think you're declaring an interest, Councillor Miletto. Wait till Councillor Miletto leaves the room. Okay, councillors, the recommendations on page 589.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Greenhouse. Any speakers? Councillor.
That's fine.
Righto. Who's first?
Right, thank you. I think this is incredibly inappropriate. I think it's inappropriate that we're being required to vote on it. I think it's inappropriate that it's even being considered. We're talking about the possibility of increasing rates by 2.5%, and this is essentially increasing our fees by 10.5%, which are already at the top of the allowable scale. I think it's fiscally irresponsible and utterly inappropriate. So I'll be voting against it.
Thanks, Councillor Kinghorn. Councillor Peterson.
I'll speak against the recommendation. We'd be voting ourselves a 10.5% pay rise. Ratepayers $39,000 in 3 months of our first meeting, on the background of us potentially about to request special variation to raise rates above the high rate pegging threshold because finances are tight. 26 households will have to pay their general rates only to cover the cost of our superannuation, and the full percentage of the total budget. But I think it's a bit of a statement of priorities, and I would love a feature of this council to be we make conscious choices to keep our costs down. One fantastic example is that staff tells me during the last council, the cost per meeting of meetings, meal and alcohol was about $700 or $800 for each council meeting. I was so very impressed with you, Mr. Mayor, when that just disappeared without a fuss or any media attention for our term. I hope we could demonstrate that attitude tonight, that we would allocate, if there's $40,000 there, to an indoor playground, for instance. It this way. I would reconsider when the budget is not in deficit, but for now I'll have to vote against it.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. I understand the optics of this may look a little bit.
Move the motion, yes. She hasn't spoken.
I haven't spoken yet. No.
Sorry, my
this may look like we're giving ourselves a pay rise, but at the end of the day, this is a job. We are entitled to superannuation, and this has been a point that has been long fought for at the local government level for many years, I understand. I think it's a great achievement to finally bring us in line with all the other levels of government and pretty much every employee everywhere around the country, except for gig workers. Superannuation is an important part of work, and this is a job like any other. I think we need to support this because we work for it.
Councillor Greenhalgh.
I'd also like to speak for the motion. I do agree it is a very personal decision, but if we were to put it out there to any of our ratepayers, are you prepared to forego a portion of your income to build an indoor playground? What do we think their response is going to be? We give up our time to work. It is a paid job to put in hours for our community, and I think we deserve to be rewarded for that. The time that we're putting into council, we could potentially be out there earning money in another role where we're getting paid superannuation, but we have chosen to support our community. And I believe, like Councillor McDonald says, superannuation is an important part of our future, so we can finance ourselves later in life. And we're not going to be on the pension as early as, people are currently nowadays. We're not going to be asking for a rebate on our council rates because we're still going to be working, or we're going to be self-funded retirees. So I think it's really important that, we do consider this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mallard.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm also speaking in favour of the motion. And the first thing I want to say is, we shouldn't have been put in the position of making this decision. The New South Wales government legislated this and made it so that councils had to make the choice. They should have just made it compulsory. So I wanted to note that first of all. The other thing I wanted to say is I don't believe anyone in this chamber ran for council for money. I'm a member of a party that has long argued that the remuneration is way under what it should be for the work that we do as leaders in our community. But I agree with the principle that we are doing the work. I can't speak to the circumstances of every other councillor in the room, but I know, it's taking a significant amount of time, and we've got a council that's putting in a huge amount of effort. I'm so impressed with how many of us are, whenever we can, we're at briefings, we're at community events, we're putting all of that time in, and I know people are reconfiguring their lives to do that. I was offered the opportunity to go from part-time to full-time in my job last year when I turned it down because I knew the time that it was going to take out of my life. So while I think we've been put in an awfully vexed position by being asked to make the decision, I believe the right decision is to agree that councillors should be paid super. I do want to note that the report says that councillors can choose individually to opt out of that if they don't want to receive it. But I really do support the principle. I know it's something councils and local government in New South Wales have campaigned and lobbied long and hard for. And so I commend the motion. Thanks.
Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Office of Local Government do something. There's obviously a legal matter hiding behind this. I mean that I think the federal government imposed the Superannuation Act, 12%, I think, at the moment. And from my previous experience of the organisation I used to work for, we had 17 years of interpreting tax law and all those type of things there. And I'm not up to date with the superannuation laws, but I would imagine there's something hidden behind this. But we'd have to go back, and is there a thing back that says, hey, we're going to go back 20, 30 years? I think the federal government might have something to say about that. We don't know. It's going to be a legal matter and those type of things there. I don't think it's got anything to do that say that we're going to be taking this. If someone doesn't want it, give it to a charity organisation like I think Councillor Nugent that didn't accept his pay increase. He said he was going to give it to an organisation.
Councillor Duffy.
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about. I'm talking about that. I'll get back to what we're talking about in a minute. But I want to go back to the origin of this 1993 Superannuation Act. ALGA, the New South Wales Local Government Association, the New South Wales Local Government Shires Association, and I had Bill Gahuli pull me up the other day, who was the CEO of the New South Wales Local Government Shires Association, and he was also previously the New South Wales Local Government Association CEO. And they have been trying for 20 to 30 years to get this to come to. So there isn't other legal matters sitting behind this. There could be ways that councils could deal with it. I mean, I'm not surprised that the state governments throw dirt onto the local councils because they like to do that. That's part of their nature. But I think there's a lot more behind what goes on here. I'm okay to deal with it matter but I think there's going to be a lot more come to term, and maybe it could be a bargaining tool for the Office of Local Government and the actual councils themselves at a higher level.
Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I speak in support of motion. Myself, I don't know how local government has got away with not paying super for so long. It was an Act of Parliament federally in 1993, and it is law that all organisations pay super. Not a pay rise as such. It's monies that is not yours until you are 70 years old. It goes into a super fund, and certainly the other areas where we don't taxed on our. So every other board that you will see, every member of parliament you will see by law paid or has to pay super. Local government has never paid it is beyond me. I don't know how they've got away with it. I'm not saying there's anything underhanded, but how it was never legislated. Because members of parliament don't vote whether they get super or not. Law. You get a job, you don't say, I don't want super. You've got to get super. It's law. Certainly, as business owners, I won't say that because it's entitled to you. But it's not really your money until such time as you earned it and retired. And as Councillor Duffy said, that if it's always been we've always had to vote for any pay increases in the chamber. For some reason, they put it back onto councillors, and a lot of councillors have mentioned here tonight saying that why are we voting on our own? Well, but whilst you may be able to donate your wages to charity, I'm certainly sure you can't donate your super fee. That is actually not your money. So you can't give it away. You can certainly, it has to go into a super fund of some description, even if it is your own self-managed super fund.
No other speakers. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, raise your hand. Against? Could we bring Councillor Miletto back into the chamber, please? Okay, I'll move on to item 5.5, which is statement of investments. Moved by Councillor Duffy, seconder. Councillor Floyd, any speakers? No speakers. I'll put the motion. All raise your hand in favour. Against?
Just a matter arising, Mr Mayor.
Carried. Matter arising.
Look, I was just out in the foyer there, and there might be not too late to allocate some money in the budget to repair the roof, which is leaking in 3 places out there, so the carpet's all wet. You might have to get some more buckets out there and do something with that.
Thanks, Councillor Miletto.
Just thought I'd point that out.
Thank you.
I just asked Mr Greenham to conduct an inspection.
On the roof. The roof's going to fall in, so we've got to get out.
I'll move on to item 5.6, which is additional special variations for 2022-2020 financial year. The recommendation's on 597.
I'm happy to move it, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor Duffy. Can I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Mallard. Any speakers?
Chairman, I'm happy to move this. What amazes me is actually that IPART can come up with a 0.7%, and then the minister can come out and say, hang on, they've got something wrong here. We'll let you go to 2.5. It means there's a bit of a thing here, and we all know how much prices have gone up in the last 20 years. So there's something's not gelling somewhere. As Councillor Whitten mentioned before, if you don't take the increases, lose it forever. Up later on, but it goes forever. And those it's just to me, it's a type of thing we have to do. You'll find all councils right across the state will exactly the same because they understand how the process works. But as I said, I'm still astounded by the difference between the IPART figure and the.
Councillor Kinghorn.
Okay, so just further to my previous comments about orange rates being higher than their counterparts in similar councils, I can't support this until I can understand why ours are higher, which is why I'd like the information about why that might be, in which case I'd be happy to support it. But at this stage, I don't understand that, and I'm not intellectually impaired at all, so I should be able to follow it given the appropriate information. So until then, I won't be supporting any rate rise.
Councillor Kinghorn. Councillor Greenhalgh.
I'd just like to support the motion and back up what Councillor Duffy said. You know, the compound on this, you know, is $620,000 to $7 million for the 10-year lifespan of the long-term financial plan. I think it's easier to take the extra $1.33 a week now than it is to try and recoup that in 10 years' time. And ratepayers pay for the mistakes that we've made in this chamber tonight by not passing this.
Any other speakers? Councillor Mallard.
Again, I'll just speak in support of the motion and agree in terms of the cumulative impacts. It's the responsible thing we have to do. I know ratepayers enjoy rate increases, but to be able to deal with the pressures we're seeing on costs for council, just like is happening in everywhere else in the economy, we would have to cut significantly to apply for this increase. So yeah, I fully support the motion. Thanks.
Councillor Leto.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question I have for a vote is with regards to pensioners. I'm just wondering what type of dispensation they will receive in regards to this. I'm assuming that they would still be subject to the 2.5% increase. Is that correct? And if so, what relief will they receive and in what areas?
CFO, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, yes, all ratepayers will get increase and they will continue to receive the rebates they're entitled to. And as we know, the government doesn't necessarily move those rebates in line with cost of living. So they've been stuck at the same level this year as they were last year. So they will see that 2.5% increase.
Are you able to tell council or the chamber how many pensioners or other people take advantage of that,
the rebate? I don't have the numbers at hand. I'll have to take that question on notice, Councillor.
Thank you. You won't be here.
Sure, Mr. McDonald can get those numbers for you.
Thank you.
And I suppose that's us promoting it better, probably, like we were talking about before. Yeah. Okay, I'll put the motion. All in favour, raise your hand. Against? Carried. I'll move on to item 5.7.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move 5.7, but I want to make an adjustment to that. As the Orange District Cricket Association and Junior Association pay the fee of $10.
Oh, sorry.
Mayor, I'll just leave
Councillor
the chamber.
Greenhalgh needs to declare an interest. She's a office bearer. That's the one. So are you moving that motion with a change of wording?
Moving the motion with the change of the Orange District Cricket Association, Orange Junior Cricket Association fee for this year.
I'll second that for discussion. That's the motion.
You have a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'd just like to say this much, that we've had a terrible few years and it hasn't been probably used as probably well as it could be. And because of the situation there, I think it's a good gesture.
No other speakers. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. Can we have Councillor Greenhalgh re-enter the room, please?
Just clarify something, Mr. Mayor. Is Councillor Duffy make an amendment to the motion for $10? So what did we actually pass, the $10 or the 20? Thank you. That was an amendment to the motion.
Well, it was part of the motion.
Thank you.
I'll move on to item 5.8, which is the impact benchmarking domestic waste management charges draft submission to IPART on benchmarking and rate capping. The recommendations on page 605.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Mallard. Can I have a seconder?
Yeah.
Seconded, Councillor McDonald. Any speakers? Councillor Mallard.
If I can just again commend the staff for the work that they've done on this. I think, we've been talking about IPART and the issues with the impact their decisions can have on our finances going forward. And I think, it really sets out the concerns about why a sort of statewide benchmarking approach would be really problematic for us. So, I appreciate I was the one who requested that this report come back for us. Really happy with it going in. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you for putting in the comparable councils, and it's actually quite good to see how different some of the services are. And I know in the past we've had the suggestion that we not have a weekly pickup of the red bin, which was met with great dismay by Orange people. I just wonder whether at some point that's something that could be looked at again, because we now have a green bin that I think we didn't have at the time. Everybody thought the bins were going to reek. Whereas if the green bin's emptied every week, then that's not such an issue for the red bin. So down the track, that's possibly something we could look at that might reduce the fees. But when it's justified like this, I have no problem with supporting it.
Councillor Peterson.
You, Mr. Mayor. In a sort of question on notice that I had put that's answered on 108, I was hoping for basically some more specific impacts of what would happen if the rate pegging variation was not approved. I certainly understand that if we are unable to raise the costs of this in line with cost of the services, that's a non-specific answer that, yep, there would have to be either reduction in services or loans. Quite predictable. I wondered if there could be a specific impact that could be said, for instance, well, we wouldn't do a green bin or something like that. I suspect that maybe such a specific answer might not be possible until you actually know what money is around. But if that might be a helpful thing to really be able to consider what's the true impact. We either didn't vote for it or...
Graham's going to talk to that.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Through the chair, if I may just respond, it's a number of services could be impacted, but I guess the totality of the amount, if we were to have a 1.1% cap of domestic waste management charges, you'll see in the financial implications of the report, and it's also included in the body of the report as well, that there'd be a $40 million turnaround over the life of the plan. So we go from at the end of the modelling period is 39 million. Council's reserve balance falls into a negative position from the 2031-2032 financial year and continues to decline rapidly thereafter to a point of 13 million in the red. So, an overall turnaround of $52 million over the life of the 30-year financial plan. It does make a difference.
Thank you. Councillor, stay there, Ian, I think. Councillor Maletta.
Thank you. Just with regards to the garbage waste bins, I'm assuming that Council has a contract with J.R. Richards for a certain period of time. I'm just wondering what the length of the contract is and how long it's got to go. My first question.
Thank you. Yes, it's a 10-year contract period that allows them to amortise the costs of their plant and vehicles over that 10-year period, as well as the bins themselves. And I believe it commenced in either 2016 or 2017, and therefore would be up for renewal in 2026 or 2027, just before my time.
Thank you. And my second question is with regards to the bin themselves. I'm assuming it doesn't matter whether you use bins or not, you still get charged for them. So with regards to domestic waste, household waste, are you able to indicate what each house would pay per year, or what J.R. Richard charges council per household per year for the picking up of those bins?
So the page 607 of the report gives a table there of our annual charges for each of the services. It doesn't just include the pickup charge, but it obviously includes the total operating costs for the facilities around the residential garbage, the recycling, and the organics component. So in total, $454 per annum per resident.
It doesn't matter whether you're a pensioner. There's no concession for pensioners, I'm assuming, within that, and it doesn't matter whether you put your bin out or not. Council still get charged the same.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Maletta. Any other speakers? There being no other speakers, I'll put the motion. All in favour, raise your hand. Against? Carried. I'll move into item number 6 is closed meeting. The Chief Executive Officer will advise Council whether any written submissions have been received relating to any item advertised for consideration by closed meeting of the Orange City Council.
Yeah, no such.
In accordance with the local government... Sorry?
Matter for the Mayor and the councillors. Sir? The gentleman wants to make a application as to why something should be...
So do we have to vote on it as a council whether we do that?
Whether you allow him, I would think.
Okay, I'll put the motion whether the request is available to hear in council. All closed. All those in favour?
Councillors, this is Mr. Colin
Mr.
Young.
Colin Young. Yes, Mr. Young.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd just like to request the council consider 6.1 in open council meeting. The reason for that is that when the Northern Distributor, unnamed at that stage, was a name was being decided on it, it created a considerable amount of interest and passion, I guess, in the community. And I don't think that it's anything in commercial in confidence or an issue that is a great emotional situation. So I think that it should be heard in open council. Thank you.
Thank you. CEO.
So, councillors, I made the decision that it would be enclosed for the reason that there were personal matters involving the tailor. That's the stated reason for closed. So it's a matter for you, councillors. Councillor Whitten, I seek your...
I'll move that it be done in open. I haven't got a problem.
All in favour?
Um,
Hang on, sorry.
I would just like to speak. Coming from someone who has lost a child, I just have a few reservations. You know, if Mr. Taylor's children were to view the meeting in open, like I've got nothing to hide about it. Yeah, I'm just conscious of their situation.
Well, I'll need to put the vote. All in favour that we hear it in open, raise your hand. Against? Councillor Greenhalgh. So do I do 6.1 before we go into closed council?
Item 6.1 is now brought into open and you...
Okay, well...
can we just wait for this? You okay with that? Yes,
okay. Okay, I'll bring 6.1 to the... before we go into close. So obviously the motion is on in our closed section. Can I have a mover?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the recommendation to go on 28-day submission.
I have a seconder. Thank you.
I make an amendment, please, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
My amendment was at third point, that a list of prominent historical and contemporary residents be compiled for consideration for names of future roads. Same manner as, say, Banjo Patterson Way, prominent locals could be considered for roads in the future. Examples of famous people in Orange, or linked with Orange, Shannon Knoll, Jason Belmonte, Charles Cutler, Neville House, maybe those awarded the Order of Australia, which is on plaques downstairs. Have a look at. It doesn't need it. Well, I did have a question.
Get carried away.
I did have a question whether they must be deceased or not, but that's probably separate. I thought that a list of people who could be considered would be a useful tool to have for future roads. Going to consider naming.
Are you happy to put that in your motion, Councillor Whitten?
No, Mr. Mayor.
No. So that's
I think that's a separate matter.
Amendment. Can I have a seconder for the amendment?
Read again, please.
A list of prominent historical and contemporary residents be compiled for consideration for the naming of future roads.
Seconded, Councillor Mallard. That's the amendment. Any speakers for the amendment? Heard from Council. Against. Got to deal with the amendment first.
The amendment first.
I will. Speaking, Councillor Duffy.
I'm just asking clarification. My clarification is, my belief is that
Okay, well that's fine. I thought we'd put the amendment first, and then we can speak about the motion.
You vote on the amendment first.
Okay, do you want to speak for the amendment, Councillor Duffy?
No, I want to speak for the motion.
Okay.
I don't want to take away his right of reply.
Lost me.
I'm lost.
You can speak for the motion. We just vote on the amendment first.
I'm quite happy to speak for the motion. The reason being it's just saying it's going on 28 days. So I accept the fact that what Mr. Young has spoke to us about as regards to why it should be in open and all those type of things there. I don't have a problem with that. I would imagine anyone who is like-minded, look, Mr. Young, or against or for, whatever the case may be, will make a submission in any shape or form when the time comes. We'll make that decision when it comes back in front of us. I mean, and we might have some relevant information of what effect it could have, and that could be the issues that we're talking about with Councillor Peterson. But I think it needs to be kept short and simple, and we stick with the basic principle of let's call for expressions of what do you call it, the submissions, and just move on from there.
Councillor Miletto.
I'd like to ask Councillor Peterson to withdraw his amendment and submit a new notice of motion, because I think it's a totally different issue. I wouldn't like to combine them because I think both issues are very important. They deserve due diligence. So I'd ask you to consider withdrawing your amendment and perhaps next meeting bring a new notice of motion before council.
I was just about to offer that, having heard from Councillor Whitten and Duffy. Good point. I will bring it next meeting.
Okay. Those the motion. As printed. Moved by Councillor Whitten, seconded by Councillor Duffy. Speaks Councillor Kinghorn.
I'm just wondering if it's possible to, I mean, absolutely no disrespect here. The Northern Distributor Road describes basically what the road is, what it does, where it goes. And for people who aren't terribly familiar with Orange, then it's actually a way of helping navigate. And I just wonder if it's possible to put the Glen Taylor Way and keep the NDR part as well. Is that something that's possible to do? Can you have it like one in brackets somehow?
I was being spoken to then, Councillor King.
Councillor Greenham was listening.
To Greenham, thank you.
That's all right. I'll remember.
So the Geographic Naming Board prefers just one name. However, there is precedence for multiple names, such as Banjo Patterson Way, for example. So the Geographic Names Board have given their requirements around naming a road, and their preference is for one name. So their preference would be for Taylor Way. However, I don't think that necessarily recognises the individual, and there would be multiple names that would be similar to that. So just with that, you could also have a proposal where the NDR is included in it. May not be accepted by the Geographic Names Board, who will have the ultimate decision. Also, like to point out, the Geographic Names Board will only take an application 12 months after his passing, but obviously there's some things that we could do now to start this process along the way.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that it's called Glen Taylor Way, but just in brackets underneath Northern Distributor Road, so that I just think that would be less confusing for the public.
Thanks, Councillor Kinghorn. Councillor Miletto.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess it's just a comment, and depending on what the feedback is on people's appetite to change the name of the road, just wondering, should that not be successful, whether we should include a amendment to the motion that we could look at perhaps a rest area or something like that along the road. Is that a possibility? It's a separate issue, but just trying to cover all bases here.
Should I close the debate? I can speak to that.
Yep. Make that a matter arising.
Yeah.
Citizens rising and then.
Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's going on 28-day submission, so everybody in this room and community can put forward ideas, and it's certainly going to come back to this chamber for further discussion on those things. Certainly, I know that there'll be that this process will be dealt with accordingly, following the rules. And the family respect that. They understand that. Well, local government rules, because they've been in their whole life with it. And they do know that there's due process, that these things need to be followed up by the staff. There are rules, and somewhere along the line it may get knocked on the head. But if everything is acceptable, and it comes to this chamber and we agree on it, and then it goes to the next corporate body and they approve it, then that'll be done. A lot of people have said to me that, yeah, there's all other names that could be done, but no one's ever brought them forward. It's like any idea. We've all seen it as councillors in this room. As soon as you bring up an idea, then another opinion, and that's democracy. That's why we're here. So, put it out on 28 days and let's see what the community think.
Can I just get a point of clarification? So is there any reason why it couldn't be Glen Taylor Northern Distributor?
change that later.
Yeah.
If we just put it out.
Okay, so
Come up with all new
the motion is that we put it on 28 days, or it's motion as read. There's two points to that motion. All those in... Sorry?
All right, kick 'em.
All those in favour, raise your hand. Against? Carried. Matter arising. So did you want a matter arising, Councillor Mileto?
No, I think I'll wait to
what happens.
the feedback comes back and take it from there.
Did you want a matter arising, Councillor Pearson, a report bring back for what you were saying?
Thank you, but no, I'll put it in a motion and I'll have to look at it.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Peterson. I'll move on into closed council now. Chief Executive Officer will advise that council, if any written submissions have been received relating to any other advertised for consideration by closed meeting of Orange City Council.
No such submissions have been received.
In accordance with the Local Government Act 1993 and the Local Government General Regulation 2005, it's the opinion of the Chief Executive Officer the following business of its kind is referred into section 10A(2) of the Act and should be dealt with in a confidential session of council meeting closed to press and public. Item 6.2, resubmission, construction of the Southern Distributor Road Stage 4 and Shirley Collector Road Stage 5. These items are classified confidential under the provisions of the section 10A(2) of the Local Government Act 1993, which permits the meeting to be closed to the public for business relation to see information that would be, if disclosed, confer a commercial advantage on a person who the council is conducting or proposes to conduct business.